Democratic presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders has unveiled plans for a big wealth tax. While similar in some ways to Senator Elizabeth Warren's proposal, the Vermont lawmakers' tax would impact roughly 180,000 households, while Warren's would only affect 70,000.
And multi-billionaires like Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos would pay approximately $9 billion in taxes. Joining us to discuss this proposal, how it's being received, political commentator, host of the Kyle Kulinski Show, Kyle Kulinski himself. There's some other news in the world today too, Kyle, so we're going to get into all of that. Thank you so much for joining us again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's begin with the wealth tax. I mean, it's something that is pretty radically different from Elizabeth Warren's tax. And I think we were discussing this before the show. Bernie's been a proponent of this since 2014. Do you think he's getting enough credit for this in the media, one? And what do you think of the proposal generally, too?
Well, no, of course not, because he never gets enough credit. But I think the wealth tax is brilliant in that it sounds like incredibly moderate, even though it's actually a pretty solid left-wing proposal. And I remember reading when Elizabeth Warren rolled hers out, what is it, like a 2% or 3% tax?
Yeah, it was a 2% tax, right.
On wealth over, what is it, 50 million or something like that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that sounds like even hardcore Republicans are going to be like, oh, I like that. And they do. I mean, the polls show that they do. So
Super
I think
popular.
the wealth tax... Yeah, I think the wealth tax is brilliant politically in that it's a very solid left-wing proposal, but it comes across as extremely moderate. And in the case of Bernie versus Warren, of course, as we always see, Bernie outflanks Elizabeth Warren, but he won't be getting the credit for it. In the same way that when they rolled out their plans to cancel student loan debt, his plan is, let's cancel all of it. And her plan is, let's do this wonky technocratic thing where it's a certain percentage over a certain income level. And, you know, obviously I'm a supporter of Bernie. And you could see the appeal of the cancel all of it versus let's draw some arbitrary lines.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, she in general tends to favor sort of means-tested solutions. Bernie tends to favor universal solutions. My preference is also for universal solutions. But you do have to love the way the media covers this, right? The fact that Warren sort of piggybacks on Medicare for All or Green New Deal or these other proposals is seen as an asset, right? The fact that Sanders is doing a wealth tax, even though he was the original sort of thought leader behind the wealth tax, that he comes out with it in his presidential campaign after Warren, is used as a way for the media to say basically like, oh, he's struggling in the polls, so he's just copying Warren, and to dismiss him.
Yeah, and that reflects the ideology of mainstream media, that they themselves are, more in alignment with a wonky, technocratic, means-tested approach to politics, and they're not in favor of a swashbuckling, populist, solidly left social democratic vision. So now they would swear up and down that they're not biased in that way, but all the coverage shows that indeed they are biased in that way.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start describing my political ideology as swashbuckling. I like that.
Yeah, I like that too. Kyle, one of the most interesting things here is that, people are writing the obituary of Bernie Sanders and saying, oh, Elizabeth Warren is eclipsing him. She's taking the top of the Democratic race. She's #1 in the Quinnipiac poll right now. They're saying, oh, well, Elizabeth Warren brings all of these. She actually has a plan, and she has Bernie's exact vision. I know you disagree with that very much, that there is a large difference between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. What do you think that is?
Yeah, so, if whoever's listening to this, if they fancy themselves somebody who believes in a social democratic vision, Scandinavian-style approach, or a democratic socialist vision, this isn't really an open question. It's an empirical question. And we can go through their policies issue for issue and see, what aligns more with that philosophy. So in the case of Elizabeth Warren, you have to remember, she voted for Ben Carson to be head of housing and urban development. And it was only after a giant backlash from the base that she flipped that vote. Now, what that tells you is oftentimes she misfires on issues that are a layup. And that's not something you see from Bernie Sanders. As we just touched on before, Bernie wants to eliminate all student loan debt and all medical debt. She does not. She actually told Cenk Uygur in an interview that, quote, allow me to make a spirited defense of Joe Manchin. Now, Joe Manchin, as you're familiar, is probably the furthest right-wing Democrat that we have. And this is a guy who blocks all of our important legislation and a guy who agrees with Republicans on their terrible legislation, like deregulation of Wall Street. And when she says that, that's a clear sign that she's not going to do what Bernie told me to my face that he would do, which is I'll absolutely take on my own party. I'll absolutely support primary challengers against them if they're blocking the agenda of the American people. And so it's a totally different mindset. Her mindset is I'm a team player. I'll work, I'll color within the lines. I'll work within the system, and I will take my wins where I could get them. And if that happens to be just tweaks around the edges, which is what it will be, because there will be massive pushback against these ideas, well, then that's fine with her. And that's not fine with me. She also voted for Donald Trump's giant bloated military budget, which gave him more money than he even asked for. That's something that's inexcusable in my eyes, because foreign policy is just as important as domestic policy. And then she even said she'd take big money in the general election, and she used a very sleazy accounting trick to take money from her 2018 Senate race and put it right back into her primary race right now. So she raised big money, and she shuffled that money into her campaign now, and then she turns around in this campaign and says, me? No, I'm not taking big money. I decided I'm not going to take big money. So it's a lot of, sleazy stuff like that. And then furthermore, she's a professorial technocrat in a populist age. So that doesn't resonate stylistically even with, the feelings of the time.
Yeah. I know you saw the thing I said the other day. I mean, she's a wine track candidate, and we love to nominate wine track candidates in the Democratic Party and then lose with wine track candidates in the Democratic Party. And I don't think any of that's written in stone, but it looks like a very similar model to what we've done in the past. Another area that where Warren and Bernie have been different is in their approach to impeachment. I mean, they both now are on the record as calling for impeachment effectively, but she's made that call more consistently. She's been sort of more out front in putting that at the center of her campaign. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, every candidate and every politician who's calling for impeachment, they should be forced to walk through exactly what they think will happen. Because I'll tell you exactly what will happen, okay? First of all, right now it's just an impeachment inquiry. But let's say for argument's sake, it actually gets to a vote on the House floor. What'll happen is it could get through the House, okay? Then it goes to the Senate. In the Senate, you have a trial-like situation, and you need a 2/3 majority in order to actually impeach Donald Trump in the sense that everybody thinks of, the colloquial understanding, which is he gets removed from office, okay? There is, hear me now, quote me later, a 0% chance that 2/3 in the Senate will say, we're going to get rid of Donald Trump. So what that means is the media is going to be forced to write the headlines on that day that say Teflon Don survives again. And then, the best evidence we have for what will happen at that point is going back to what happened with Bill Clinton, because this happened under him, and his approval rating went up. Right. So this is the way I think it'll unfold. I think it's definitely most likely. I only see it ending one way. And if that one way ends up helping Donald Trump, I have no idea why anybody would be for it. It's like people are all in favor of it, and they're not actually logically thinking through what might happen. And that annoys me. And then furthermore, if you talk to 4 different Democratic representatives, they'll give you 4 different reasons for impeachment.
Right.
And that's ridiculous. It's all scattershot. It's just a mess. And the underlying thing is, Trump is bad. And it's like, well, this is like kind of what the right is saying about you. They're caricaturing you and saying like, you don't even have specific reasons. You're just like, saying Trump is bad and using that. So what I would tell them is if you're going to do impeachment, you should do it on the issue of emoluments, because he's taking massive amounts of money from Saudi Arabia through his DC hotels, and then link that into the genocide in Yemen, because, he's doing these weapons deals with Saudi Arabia, and he literally killed a resolution that would have stopped us from arming Saudi Arabia. So that's the issue where there's the most there, in my opinion. And if they were to do impeachment, they should do emoluments and link it to the genocide in Yemen and us backing Saudi Arabia. And I wouldn't touch Mueller with a 10-foot pole, and I wouldn't touch this Ukraine business with a 10-foot pole, because I got news for you. There's a lot of sketchy stuff on the Ukraine side that's not just Trump bad.
Yeah, so true. And you gotta love how the Democratic Party jumps headfirst into a process they know will end in a loss in the Senate.
Here we go.
It's our style. Yeah. Kyle, thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys.
We'll have more Rising after this.